All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today and enjoying my tunes here in the morning. I've never actually DJed from a podium, so this is super fun. If you like that music, that's all local music. My DJ name is Mr. Denver. I've been playing here on KGNU for a lot of years and also playing a lot of this music around positivity, around change, at rallies for housing, for environmental justice. And today, we're going to talk about both. And I'm really just beyond excited about this project. It's been 18 months in the making. I know it's hard to believe on my end. And to build a partnership that empowered students, that brought two universities together to take a look at what hopefully will be groundbreaking research to help us really focus where we want to spend our resources, how we want to decide where we build, how we build, and healthy places. And if you all are just coming in here while you're watching the presentation, grab one of these books in the back, take a look. I'm sorry they're not to go home. We got a limited number of them, but we will be referencing them in the presentation today, and they have to do with building healthy places. How do we make decisions that are good for both our economy and for the people at the same time? So this is gonna be our agenda today, where we're gonna get started here. We're gonna do some language justice. I believe our translator's here and our interpreter, excuse me. We're gonna do some land acknowledgements, and certainly talking about land use, you have to be talking about land acknowledgements. We're gonna get into taking a look at the research that helped me get to where I am today and where I decided to even conduct one of these buildable lands analysis. And then we're gonna get into the actual tool itself. And you're gonna hear from my partners at the University of Colorado, Denver, who helped develop this tool, put it online, all the stuff I don't know how to do. I am not an expert by any means in coding or turning things into a map. With that being said, we're going to invite Tom Romero here with the iRise program up because this is really important to the University of Denver, talking about land acknowledgements. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on indigenous land. We are in the homeland of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. We also recognize the 48 contemporary tribal nations that are historically tied to the lands that make up this state.
This land where we work, live, and learn has been the site of human activity for 13,000 years. Thus, we honor elders past, present, and futures, and those who have stewarded the land throughout 500 generations.
We also want to recognize the repeated violations of sovereignty and territory that have impacted the original inhabitants of this land for the past 400 years. We know that this space and nation were founded upon beliefs, attitudes, and ideas that continue to enact exclusions and erasures of indigenous peoples. Indeed, we at the U played a distinct role in the Sand Creek Massacre and ourselves struggled to reconcile that past with a substantive commitment to equity, inclusion, diversity, and most importantly, justice.
We would also like to affirm that this type of acknowledgement, although gaining popularity, is merely insufficient. It doesn't undo the generational harm that's been done and continues to be perpetrated now and against indigenous peoples, their land, and their sovereignty.
May this acknowledgement demonstrate the commitment from all of us connected to iRise to work together to dismantle ongoing legacies of settler colonialism, oppression, and inequities, and to recognize the hundreds of indigenous nations who continue to resist, live, create, and uphold their sacred relations across their lands.
Thanks, Tom. And if you'd stay put, this is also the land acknowledgement from the University of Colorado system, very similar. And this is certainly something that I do in my work on a regular basis. One thing that I always like to ground people in, especially as a person who works on environmental issues, is why did so many tribes call this place home? It's because water is sacred and we are the headwater state and we have a sacred responsibility to take care of that. The 7 great rivers leave our state. And so you can imagine, even if you live in Arizona and you said, where does my water come from? You come back to our majestic mountains and you understand why they were revered and why they need to be protected. And I'm grateful for both universities for taking on that responsibility. And certainly it was something that I gave a long thought to before I came back to DU to come to school here and to work as a community scholar, because, you know, as an indigenous person, these are things we have to grapple with. But we live in the modern era. And I'm grateful that DU supported this work. And so I really want to say that I'm grateful for the iRise program for that. And if you'd come up here, we're going to just talk about people online or here in person who want to listen in Spanish.
Hi, I'm Danielle Short with the Community Language Cooperative, and we are what we call language justice practitioners. I will be providing simultaneous interpretation between English and Spanish. But the greater goal is to create spaces where everyone can really participate in the language of their heart and really bring their full self to the work. Today, we're not doing full language justice where we give everyone interpretation and where there might be an opportunity to listen for me to listen to me interpret from Spanish into English, but just to give you a little bit of an idea, that is often what we do. So far, I have not seen anyone asking for equipment, but I do have these little this equipment for language justice, for interpretation. And if you do hear me murmuring in the back of the room, that is why. Entonces, si alguien necesita interpretación o quiere interpretación al español, soy Daniela Short del Community Language Cooperative, aquí para ofrecer servicios de interpretación simultánea entre el inglés y español, también con el motivo de crear un espacio de justicia de lenguaje donde todos puedan participar en el lenguaje de su corazón y traer todo su ser a este trabajo. Entonces voy a estar interpretando al fondo. Si quieren estos aparatos, estoy ahí. Y si no hay otra cosa, pueden seguir con la agenda.
Yeah, thank you again for that. One of the things that we want to point out is language justice isn't easy. It's a continuum. I wish that we had the resources to translate all these slides. We are grateful that we have the ability to translate or interpret this, and there will be a recording in Spanish for people who want to listen, but it costs resources, it takes time, and it takes a commitment. And I want you to know that we made the first step here today, and as we are producing more of the content related to this, we're going to make our best effort. That's our commitment. And I think that that's really what these land acknowledgements are about. That's what these language justice statements are about. Nobody's perfect. We're just trying to get better and to make it more accessible for more people. So with that, I'll pass it on to you, Tom, to talk a little bit about the iRise program.
Well, on behalf of the University of Denver, I'd like to just again do another welcome to all of you here today. My name is Tom Romero. I'm only wearing two hats now at this university. I'm the faculty director for the Interdisciplinary Research Institute for the Study of Inequality, or iRise, as you've come to know it. I'm also an associate professor of law and history, just right across the quad here. And it's been my honor and my pleasure to work with a tremendous amount of faculty, of students and staff for the last 10 years. iRise was launched officially in the 2013-2014 academic year. And as you see up on this screen here, our real sort of vision and mission is to reimagine and create opportunities for diverse peoples, and particularly historically underrepresented peoples, to engage in research that's impactful for their communities, right? And so we have been developing a whole bunch of different ways in which that happens. A postdoctoral fellowship program, we give pilot grants to faculty. And a couple of years ago, or actually pre-COVID, sort of lose track of time, we started and we got some pilot funding from the university to start a visiting community scholar program. And one of the sort of big ideas of that was how and in what ways we could leverage the research that is already going on in our classrooms, in our labs, that our faculty are doing, many of them working with community partners, to raise and to lift the work that we knew that was happening in the community, right? In terms of identifying the scholars that exist outside the sort of boundaries of this university, to identify what are larger community concerns and needs for data, for research, for scholarship, and for creative works. And so one of the sort of wonderful sort of byproducts of this program, we have had basically 3 generations of visiting community scholars. And Ian Thomas Tafoya is one of them, one of our most recent ones, who, as you will see up here, got to do some amazing research, right, connected to his longer-term leadership and his longer-term vision about how to really connect data with the universities, with impactful change, right, to really address systemic and institutional inequities. And so it is just an honor and a pleasure to sort of have this forum, to be connected to our visiting community scholars. And one sort of final acknowledgement I want to make here, and it's something that it sort of always strikes me when I'm sort of in these spaces. or maybe a couple different acknowledgements. One is just the tremendous privilege to be here in this beautiful space that we know, and this university, right, with these beautiful manicured grounds that are maintained by people that you don't see in the room, right? And they give us tremendous privilege to sit here and to think and to share these ideas, right? But much of the work that we do is on behalf of all of them. I also want to give a big shout out to our Associate Director of iRise, Marinka Swift. Marinka's over there. Marinka is really kind of the day-to-day, 24-hour, 7-day a week sort of operational director of iRise. She makes all of us look good. She's the one that puts this together and provides this space. And so, you know, without her, we cannot do this sort of work. So thank you, Marinka, Dr. Swift. And without further ado, let me turn it over to the presentation. Thank you all for being here today.
Can you hear me? Okay. Just going to introduce myself. You'll hear from me more later. My name is Mandy Reese, and I am currently the director of the Geospatial Analysis and Mapping Lab at CU Denver. We are a pretty cool space that gets to work on real world geospatial projects for both people within the university and outside of it. And at the same time, we're providing jobs for students. And so it's a learning opportunity to show students what it's really going to be like to work in GIS and geospatial science. And I'm also a third-year doctoral student in geography, planning, and design, and I was brought to meet Ian because our research and our interests overlap. I specifically look at how land use planning decisions have displaced communities and how that has created inequities in what we see today on our landscape. So my work is looking really critically at the transportation system. And so in terms of environmental justice and inequity, Ian and I are a good team here, and I'm excited to show you how data and geospatial data and mapping technologies can really bring to light some phenomenal, important ideas about keeping our community safe and healthy.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And that barely is scratching the surface on what these two universities and these two labs are doing. I'm going to move this so it's a little better for you all. It's been amazing to work with them. I can't thank Tom and the iRise program enough. When they first approached me about this, I was like, the study of inequality. Okay, like that's not something we talk about all the time, right? But we know that there are inequities in society. We know what side of town has the pollution. We know what side doesn't. We know where we make our decisions to build and where we don't. We know what streets flood and which ones don't, right? These are conscious choices. And when I travel across the country for my work in environmental justice, this is something that everybody knows. People know what side of town is the has and those are the have-nots. And so what we're trying to do here is uncover what's behind those decisions and how do we make the best informed decisions using data. I mean, this is what we talk about in public policy. This is certainly what the universities are talking about. And I do, again, just want to say thanks so much to a student center, right? That's really putting the money back into the community to help people do research that can be impactful, while also helping them take the burden off while they're studying and building the real world experience that they need to go get the jobs of the future that can help continue some of this work. Hopefully they get a job for the EPA, they get a job for the state of Colorado, they get a job for Adams County. This is what we want from our students. We want people to stay in our community. So again, you'll see here, this is our team. Laura unfortunately can't be here today, very ill. But Laura here is a visiting student actually from Brazil, which is really amazing. And she's had this great opportunity to push me forward, even on language justice and the conversation about Latinos, translation into Spanish, as a bare minimum, of course, but how do we, again, move that forward for Portuguese? So I want to just talk a little bit about my journey in land use and thank some people along the way. Certainly my fiance is in the audience. Ilda, I would like to thank her for supporting me. My mother, who has been a true inspiration for me. My mom's a social worker who's worked in every kind of housing you can imagine. Jobs for people, green jobs, getting to work at a bank. How do you get a job in hospitality? Helping people get off TANF and feed their kids. She's managed multifamily properties with Brothers Redevelopment. She's worked with Access Housing, doing homeless families, and now she has the great honor of working for the city of Commerce City on housing vouchers. So you can imagine I got big shoes to fill when it comes to housing. And there isn't places we can't go that people years later don't tell me the impact my mother had on helping them write their lives. Their children are in college now. And I think that for me, I even see Sochi here, who worked with my mom when she was young, and we've had a chance to chair boards. So that's, this loving spirit of justice I was raised in and marching in and helping the people. When you get ahead, you got to turn around and help people back up. Some may know that I've worked for 3 branches of local government: the public defender, the Denver City Council, and the mayor of Denver. And I had the chance to staff the Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure Committee. Boy, did that blow my mind open about how we make decisions about asphalt. Where do we spend our money and plan for bike lanes? And even, as you'll see here in this picture, the connection between trains and the land use that we are building in the newer parts of Denver that we actually began planning for in the 1980s. I want to thank Evelyn Baker, who actually works for the City and County of Denver in community planning and development. She taught the Lakewood Citizens Planning Academy, and I had a chance to take it when I was working for City Council. She brought this program to Denver, and actually there are online portals that you can go to where you can get caught up to speed about zoning so that you can be involved in the decision-making in your own community. For those who aren't familiar with the Denver Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation, that's for the people who love to go to meetings, and I'm one of them, okay? And the slogan for the Denver Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation is "Neighborhoods work best when neighbors work together." And so you can imagine, as we're bringing people together on a regular basis for parks, for safety issues, for bonds, and in this case, and in my case, for zoning and planning. I had an opportunity to serve as the chair of INC zoning and planning, I think for 6, almost 7 years. And in that, I was involved in every single land use decision. I came across my email that was going on in Denver. And so I always was paying attention to those issues. I had the great opportunity to work on these 2 plans. Blueprint Denver, this is the plan that connects transportation and zoning. I will say that I was part of the team that actually held this plan up for 6 months because of equity concerns. At that time, less than 2% of the respondents to the surveying across the city were Black, underrepresented in our data, right? And if we're going to be making decisions about where new housing is going, what the impacts are of gentrification, then we have to have people at the table. And I can tell you that after that process, we actually went through equity training. The entire staff of CPD and community leaders like myself, we went through 6 months of equity training, and this is before COVID, okay? So that was pretty cutting edge. I mean, now a lot of people are talking about this, right? Your boards and your workplace, but that was pretty big at that time. And we adopt these 40 comprehensive plans. These are our guiding documents. They exist for all of our counties. These comprehensive plans are required under state law. And getting the chance to get in the weeds and make these decisions in the future, I can tell you, is super important. If you look at our plans, especially the development of downtown, we followed the plans. Rappaport Square and all those parking lots, they were in the plans. I want to also just take a minute and thank Rocky Piro, who's here in the audience, who is the city planning director. And when I worked for a city council, he came in all the time and he just let me ask him questions. And it's actually through interviewing him about regional cooperation, right? If you believe my mantra of neighborhoods work best when neighbors work together, then you can understand that I believe the region works best when cities work together. And they have not been planning effectively together to target where our resources are going. Often our biggest concerns are that's Denver's problem, or that we're going to build this type of housing only in this county. We have to put away with that. And we have to be thinking about how we can get these 47 local governments to cooperate. I did get the opportunity to be named Who's Next in Housing in 2019. And I took back a look at this list today, and some really important names on there. Cole Chandler, perhaps you know, for the work he's doing, leading the Housing 1000 initiative for the mayor. Laura Brzezinski, who I used to work with in the city, who went on to be the head of the housing department for the city of Denver. So I got to give it up to Denverite. I feel like they were spot on. I looked at the list today of the people who are still doing this work. And for me, it's really awesome that I get to continue this work and live up to what that means. So there's a couple of books in the back, and I just wanted to highlight a little bit that went into the early research before we made the decision to do this buildable lands analysis. This Pipe Dreams and Picket Fences, which was conducted by House Key Action Network Denver, previously the leadership coming from Denver Homeless Out Loud. they were individuals that helped really radicalize me into being a housing advocate for the unhoused, helping me see a better future. And they continually do research where they go out and they talk to people on the streets to ask them, what's your biggest issue? What is it that you need? This idea of tent city urbanism, these are some of the books that were the first, before we ever had a safe outdoor site, to talk about what would it really mean to try to bring some coordination for public health for people. This book here, Counterpoints, is super inspiring. It's a book about resistance. It's written by activists from tenant unions in San Francisco, where they partnered with people like the CU Laboratory to develop maps of resistance about evictions. And it really inspired me after this research, we're planning on publishing a book as well after our presentation today. Certainly House Keys, Not Handcuffs, back to these seminal works around the rights of human beings to exist, whether they have the resources for housing in a constrained market like we do or not. In defense of housing, similarly, this book, Financing of Economic Development, we can talk about tax increment financing. We can talk about bonds. There are many ways in which we can fund the infrastructure we need, but how do we make sure we're getting the most of it if we don't figure out how to use data to target where we're going? So now I want to level set us into some of the other things that come into why a buildable lands analysis. So if you're familiar with the Department of Health and Human Services, they have come up with this index they call the social determinants of health. When people study psychology, they talk about nature, they talk about nurture. Well, we can talk about the things that are in our lives right now that have to do with our health outcomes, our economic stability, our education, our healthcare, how well we're interconnected in our communities, and certainly our neighborhoods and built environments, whether or not you have access to grocery stores, which people often will talk about, whether you have sidewalks in your community, or unfortunately, you may live next to a corporate polluter who's gone without accountability from the government for far too long. So these social determinants of health are used by our Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. They're used by the Denver Department of Public Health and Environment. And what we need to do is see some interdisciplinary conversations that are going on with people in the housing departments, right? And that comes back to the interdisciplinary part of IRISE. So for those who came in, you might have a chance to see one of these books here. And this is what I want to say thank you to Rocky Piro for. I had the opportunity to sit with Rocky as we developed this book about Colorado healthy places in a collaborative. You can see the state, the universities, engineers, nurses, architects. They brought all of these groups of people together. It was really quite inspiring, Rocky, to produce this guidebook. So you in the back, when you get a chance, you take a look, there's a box there. It's called a meeting in the box. In that are cards and a toolkit so that you can go to any community and say, let's talk about what your community needs. Let's figure out how we build a healthy place in your community, whether that's affordable housing or a park or bike lanes or commercial mixed use. They're all possible and they all have these charades in the book. And I really want to just, again, say that this is a quintessential work that I think that we need all of our elected leaders to be understanding, because health and housing so often are not in the same sentence from people. And to have this credibility of the engineers and the architects, really quite impressive. So, okay, we know how to build a place. How do we choose that place, right? And choosing that place, again, is going to come back to what the buildable analysis is about. So these are two studies that have been produced by the Denver Regional Council of Governments, those 47 governments that I was talking about here in the metro area. And you'll see that we're studying our growth patterns. We're studying what kind of housing do we need. We know a lot about the housing we need. For example, a lot of the corporate developers right now are building 1-unit apartments. But what are the surveying and the schools of surveying of students and their parents tell us? We need apartments with multiple rooms. We need 3-bedroom apartments. We need 2-bedroom apartments. We have group living ordinances that we helped pass, at least in Denver and now hopefully statewide, so that people can share the cost and their burden. And it also is good for the environment, because guess what? We don't need to run 3 refrigerators for 3 people. We could run 1 refrigerator for 3 people, just as an example. And so this body of research that we're releasing, we hope will come into this body online, that you can access online. But I really want you to know that this index and this interdisciplinary work of housing is still missing. And it's through this, again, this research that we came to this decision. So there are some amazing solutions in the community. I'm just going to touch on 6 or 7 of them. The GS Coalition, Global Area Swansea Coalition, great friends of ours, Our Land, Our Hood. And they have come up with great ideas around land trusts, where they decide they own the land, what the rates go up on those properties, who gets to enjoy the profit, and of course, doing really cool things like modular homes. There are huge efforts afoot across the state of Colorado around modular home development, which they hope will bring down the price. It's safer for workers, especially with climate change. People can go inside of a building. It's always 85 degrees. They don't have to worry about the snow. They don't have to worry about the heat. They don't have to worry about the air quality index. They get to build them inside and come and install them. So I just wanted to highlight that as a solution. But again, where do we choose to put the modular homes? We've passed really neat programs like Proposition 123 for affordable housing that not only helps speed up the permitting processes for local governments, but gives them the resources to build different kinds of housing, whether that's for the lowest income earners, people in the middle class, people who are trying to get ahead as our economy is growing here in the metro area and people's ability to purchase is shrinking. And so we've come up with these programs to help different kinds of people. In Denver, we helped pass bonds for $130 million. I mean, if we go back to when I started to work for the mayor's office, when our budget wasn't even, $800 million to be double that now, to be talking about the huge commitment that we're putting into housing, but yet it still doesn't seem enough. And when we are investing those dollars, are we investing where it's healthy, or are we investing where we're going to be end up paying for it down the line in health burdens for people? So these are some more examples. Housing tax credits through the Colorado Housing and Financing Authority. We have people who are working to have RVs and safe camping, because honestly, what we've learned in our research is that sometimes your car is the last asset that you own. And that's the last asset you own with all of your things in it. And so can we find a way for people to safely camp while they get on their feet, while they access some of these other wraparound services, as we call them? Now, you'll see this opinion piece that I actually co-authored with one of the leaders of the GS Coalition. We have something that is called an inclusionary housing ordinance in Denver. I sat on that task force representing Denver Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation. What it means is when you build a brand new building, a certain percentage have to be affordable units. We didn't think it went far enough, but we still have something in place. So what I'm hoping you see is that the smartest minds in Denver and in our region and in the state of Colorado are really trying to come together to solve this problem. We're hoping that this tool will help them, again, narrow in on where to direct these resources. I want to call out a colleague of mine who also ran for mayor of Denver. His name is Robert Chiretta. He's a builder. You may remember him from saying, "Just let me build," when he was running for office. This is a design he's come up with for a tiny home that he believes will only cost $8,000 a unit, as long as we have the right government land to put it on. That's a good solution. We got to figure out where to put it. We have all these buildings that we've identified in our urban core, and not just in our urban core, commercial businesses that have been vacant for a long time, and how we convert them. We have these wraparound programs like Caring for Denver for mental health resources, the Denver Basic Income Project to help people get the resources they need to put a down payment. We pass supportive housing social impact bonds so that we can actually measure if a program is successful and then put more money back into it. So all that to be said, again, we have some of the best minds, and a person, Cole Chandler, who now works in the mayor's office, who championed and pushed forward with the Colorado Village Collaborative, which has come up with solutions of using vacant land, underutilized land, for either outdoor camping or tiny homes. But are the locations of these accessible to the resources that people need? Job centers, buses and bikeways. Are they underneath highway bridges where they're being exposed to air pollution? And so many of these people, because of the social determinants of health, have pre-existing conditions. So I want to say that this isn't a new idea, right? Facing a housing crisis isn't a new idea for Americans. We faced it in the Great Depression. And one of the solutions around the Great Depression around both housing and the degradation of our environment was the creation of the Civilian Conservation Corps. You people may know it because we built Red Rocks with it, of course. But they did a lot of other really amazing projects. And some of the things that you're seeing now in the Build Back Better agenda around tree plantings, energy equity, I would say all fall into the same conversation. Rural electrification happened during this time. Rural broadband is happening now, right? Trying to bring up this level of infrastructure for everybody. And here in Denver, we used to camp people in City Park. And then at some point, they became overwhelmed and people started camping in Overland Park. And so what did they do in response? They came up with a really managed way of handling the housing that people needed. And you can see here, as I talked about Red Rocks, they went from, in Red Rocks right now, you can see there are these historic barracks that we're actually renovating right now. And I want to let you know, because I work with Green Latinos doing environmental justice work, you guys can go camp out there. You can take a school group out there. It's pretty amazing. But they went from these kinds of tents to barracks in one summer. I have a book over there about the Conservation Corps where they came up with similar solutions of having the people build the housing they need. So I am admittedly about the Green New Deal. I marched on the Democratic National Convention with the Sunrise Movement to demand healthcare, education, housing, and justice for all. And we're winning. We've passed billions upon billions of dollars to solve some of our greatest problems around infrastructure and to create an American Climate Corps. Perhaps if we can make the connections between the environment and housing, we can get the solutions we want. So people might say, well, that's great, people were camping then. What does the government have to do with camping now? Well, the US Forest Service, the National Park Service, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, the Department of Interior, they all have different kinds of camping, where they provide water access, sanitation, safety, the things that all human beings are entitled to by the United Nations. And guess what? They have rules. They have rules. And depending on if it's dispersed camping for the BLM or it's camping, it's quiet hours, there's issues about weapons, people are allowed to have pets. These are all issues that if you look at that picket fences back there, people raise. Not being able to stay together in congregate living, not being able to have their pets in congregate living. But if you're wealthy enough to go to the mountains, you sure do. But guess what? The city of Denver still does camping too. You can go up to Chief Hosta Lodge here where they have multiple campsites. And this is actually from the Google review. Lots of fresh water, flushing toilets, and showers. The number one issues the people on our streets are crying out for. We know how to deliver these services with the parks, and we also know how to deliver these resources with the arts. And I'm going to get to that in just a second. Now, I know people are seeing it in the news. We're feeling it in our budgets that we have migrants who are arriving here every day, unprepared for the weather, but hoping for a better life to work. And this issue is seeming to continue as more people arrive every day, and it's straining our ability to put people inside, at least into hotel rooms, among other things. And so are we in a situation perhaps where we may have to be thinking about coordinated outdoor sites or commercial development that is currently vacant? We think so. And that's what this report will be able to help us tell us, is where can these sites be that don't expose people to air pollution, that are close to resources, that we can actually put a score by a property and make decisions that are informed. You know, I want to take a minute and I want to talk about Green Latinos, which is a national environmental justice organization. I am honored to be the state director for Green Latinos. We have produced a report with over, I think now 50 other national Latino organizations that have signed on to it. Think about this as the Latino Green New Deal, because there are issues our communities face around language access, around outdoor workers and other issues. Well, we have in our Latino climate justice framework and the conversation about climate displacement and migration. These issues we're facing now are likely to continue. Unless we are able to pull the carbon from the air and change our behavior in the next few years, we are set to have to be adaptive. And part of that adaptation is going to be migration. And because we are the headwater state, we are going to see migration. You can see here actually this report, which we published a few years ago. I think it's the third bullet point down, this temporary protective status. It's the same status that you see Mayor Johnston going to the White House asking for. This is something our community's been asking for a long time. I just want you to know that. The immigration system is broken, it's expensive, it's not fair, there's no equity, and I'm glad that it's now being brought up to the White House again. But I want to be clear, there are a lot of brown activists that were asking for this a long time before you started seeing the people on TV now. So I want to just take 1 second to talk about a program, as I mentioned earlier. You have the parks who do camping. You also have the arts that do camping, and you have emergency services that can help set up camping during a disaster. This presentation for the next few slides is actually a presentation that I gave to the previous mayor's administration during COVID, and also to this current administration. And I talked about it when I was running for mayor myself. And what it is it's about getting creative. How can we use a workforce that at the time in the pandemic was completely unemployed to get to work to help solve some of these greatest problems around water, transportation, or trash access and sanitation. So some may know and have heard of my group, Headwaters Protectors, that I founded. We were artists, professionals who came together during the pandemic, and we said, you know what? We know how to bring water to an encampment because we do it for a music festival. We know how to handle trash or bring out showers because we do it for a music festival. And so you can see here that H2O is actually a water tree that you could see at any music festival, like the Underground Music Showcase. We helped get away the trash and partnered with the city to do it. So this is a Rise Music Festival. This is like the largest camping festival in Colorado. We had the person who put this on our team. Look how coordinated this is. Nobody died. We don't have disease. We're picking up the trash. We have mental health professionals and paramedics. We provide all of those resources and safety for people on a regular basis for these large events. Now, if we could just harness that same energy to put it to work to solve our crisis for a few thousand people who need stability now. We put this whole concept together here. We asked the mayor and the current mayor, can we put on a summit where we bring the arts, the parks, and the emergency management people together to say, can we solve this problem now? Where should we put these sites? Now, you see those red tents. We actually went out to the very first Safe Outdoor site with our event professionals. And we found areas for improvements and areas for strengths. But why did we have areas for improvements? Because we regularly run events. We regularly run water and electricity and meet ADA guidelines. And we feel like we need to bring a little arts and creativity to our biggest problems. We really do believe that's a value of Denverites. We surveyed people at the time. We talked to venues who were unemployed. Again, back to just underutilized space at the time. How could we harness them? We did surveying for emergency preparedness for arts and cultural workers. We still have that data. And actually, our partners have been applying for grants to continue this work under the Federal Emergency Management Office. We talked about certifications. How do we get these people who are cross-trained in emergency management, from festivals to emergency management, so that if that blizzard hits, if a flood happens, we can activate these people and they have the ability to do it. And we also talked about how we could scale safe outdoor sites, whether it was at a venue, around a rec center, a church, empty infrastructure, a park, how we could tap the money and so much more. The Art of Mass Gatherings is a partner of ours. Matthew Cal and his wife Molly are really pioneers in this work. They were doing it even before COVID, talking about how there was very little difference between Standing Rock and a power damaged city, right? And what resources that we know we can do. So this is actually from the People's Fair, where people were getting trained on how to run power at the People's Fair, knowing that they could apply those resources in an emergency. Now, we've seen examples of this with paramedics and the ambulance service. Actually, paramedics and ambulances came out of Vietnam vets. That was where that program came from. You know, a lot of people who were trained as corpsmen, we wanted to turn them into paramedics. And so can we train cultural workers into being emergency responders? We did an analysis of the cost of the sweeps. How much money we spend every single time we destroy people's property, we fence it in, we wash it off, they come back. Instead, we could apply that money to choosing better sites and providing the wraparound services that I already showed you we have the funding for. So again, this summit is something we'd still really love to do. I wanted to talk about it here because this is a solution that's on the table right now. Our mayor has embraced safe outdoor camping and safe outdoor sites. I mean, maybe not camping, I should say. He's embraced safe outdoor sites that have these housing units, but we can go from, again, tents to housing units, or we can stay at tents and get people into real housing. Those are solutions that we think are very possible. And we've been creating curriculum, standard operating procedures around this. So all that to be said, how does this come back to our site selection and this tool we chose? So this is during Mayor Hancock's administration, but you can see that the very first place that they were talking about doing a safe outdoor site was a cultural institution, but it was in a parking lot where the heating vapors from 90 degrees go into the air, and underneath a highway next to what we know the highest traffic counts of cars in the state of Colorado. Is this the place that we want to choose to put people who have pre-existing conditions around cardiovascular or pulmonary issues? No. So we fought them. Now, what about housing discussions that are going on right now? What about multimodal, transit-oriented developments that people continue to talk about? Well, I want to highlight a couple of examples here that have been raised through the research that we did to conduct this project by interviewing county commissioners from Adams County and city council members from Commerce City. These two sites in particular here are just blocks from two of the largest emitters of benzene in the state of Colorado, Suncor and Phillips 66 terminal, and yet we built housing there. This upper one here is right now just a parking lot for RTD, but if state legislation goes through for transit-oriented development, even though it's next to a highway and a concrete facility, this would be a place that could go 6, 7 stories. Is it good to have people next to transit? Yeah. Is it good to put people where we know there's air pollution and they're low income and we pay for Medicaid anyways? Or does that cost our counties in the long run? Or how about the people who live along the main line? This is from our work we were doing around the Inuwenta Basin Railway. This is about quadrupling the amount of trains that will come through Denver a day. What does that mean for the diesel truck emissions, the vibrations and sound and the impacts for health for the people who live along the main line? I can tell you that previous Councilwoman Debbie Ortega worked on this for years. I was by her side fighting for better and safety in transit. We haven't been able to pass real protections for the people who are the most vulnerable and live the closest to the train tracks. If they derail, what does that mean for how we build? How do we build the walls to withstand that? Where do you put the emergency exits in case there's an accident so that people don't go towards the problem, but yet away from it? This is another example. These are 3 facilities here in the Front Range that are commercial sterilizers. What do? They clean your scalpels, your needles, your face masks, the things you need for healthcare. Clearly something we need in our society. But this chemical, ethylene oxide, is the second most toxic chemical regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency. And right now, we're in a rulemaking regarding this toxic. And there are other alternatives that Health and Human Services, the Federal Drug Administration, and certainly the Environmental Protection Agency are aware of. So we're trying to make those required. This one in the blue here is in Lakewood, just blocks from the high school I went to, Lakewood High School. This facility in particular was so bad that Trump's EPA stepped in, okay? It's across the street from people's houses, a playground, and a bus stop. I thought I had the slide in here, so I'm sorry for that, but literally there is a transit stop on the West Line, less than 150 feet away from one of the most toxic chemicals in the state of Colorado, and they are known to have a leaking problem. If we pass a law that says transit-oriented development can go up 8 stories, is this the place that we want to go up 8 stories? Or do we say, yes, we want to go up 8 stories here and it's time to close that polluter, right? We have choices. I want to be clear about that. And so here we are, taking another stab at land use reform, increasing densities, talking about group living, some of these things I've chatted about today, making decisions about first right of refusal, whether or not an apartment building can be bought by the local government. This tool that you're about to hear about will help us make those decisions in a more informed way. Is this a good deal to buy this apartment because of the actual net positive between services and negative impacts? Or do we say, no, we'll take a pass on that one? So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my research partner here, who is the expert on the maps.
Thank you, Ian, for really setting the stage for sort of how we made these decisions and how my team and I got to where we are. So here is some basic information about housing costs and about what it means to live in this state. It's not very affordable. In order for minimum wage earners to afford really market value two-bedroom apartments, which are, as we can see, the eighth least affordable, they have to work 89 hours a week. Of course, that's more than 2 full-time jobs. By the way, these are live links, so when you get this slide, you can click on them and see the sources, just so you know. Colorado had 113,000 households without affordable housing options in 2023. Of course, that number changes every month as leases come up and people can't afford to renew them and they end up on the street. And even though there has been an increase in population in our city and in our state and our regional area over the years, our affordable housing construction has dropped by quite a lot, which, you know, that creates a mismatch. So what we are going to talk about is really how do we deal with this? But how do we deal with it in a way that is healthy and safe? Because we will both look at proposed places as well as do a really quick sort of deep dive into some places that have already been selected for micro communities and determine whether or not they'll be healthy based on the data that we found. So here's just some graphic representation of how many people live in the metro or the metro area and about how many units we are short. Of course, this depends on the model that is used. And out of all 50 states and Washington, D.C., we're the least competitive. That means when you want to go and buy a house, you have the least options out there. We're the worst in the nation. So it's no surprise that a lot more people are becoming unhoused. A few more statistics about housing income. 66% are owner occupied, which means 44% are renter occupied. That comes with a whole additional list of inconveniences related to safe spaces, related to safety in your tenure. And if you look at this graph here, the change in Denver Metro's unhoused population has increased really dramatically. In the most recent count, we're at about 9,000 people in the metro area. And recent surveys show that they're not from other states, they're from here. They're not coming here from other places, which is often what people say. It's not what's happening. These are people from our city, from our metro area, who maybe come downtown because that's where services are, but they're not coming from very far. Housing cost burden. So if we look at people in our community who may be facing, poverty at a different a series of levels here, here's what percentage of them are cost burdened, meaning they're spending more than the average, more than 30% of their household income on their housing. So for those who are extremely low income, which we can see defined right here, 87%. That means on a month-to-month or even day-to-day basis, they're facing challenges. So Ian came to me with this idea of buildable lands, which I'd never heard of. So I quickly started researching, what does this mean? And buildable lands has never been used in this way before. So if you are familiar with buildable lands, what you're going to hear me present in the next few minutes is sort of an adaptation that is like a site analysis that will help us best determine the places that we could potentially rapidly house the unhoused. So what did we do? First, I went out and I found everything I could about what buildable lands are. And to be honest with you, there's very few places that are actually doing this. The places that are doing it, though, have been doing it for a while, and it's developed and it's well documented. So I could get a lot of information. I read them all with my team. We picked out sort of, well, what are our components? I'll talk about what the differences are in a second. And then we collected and prepared the data that we thought we would need in order to apply the study to Denver. We conducted our analysis, which takes the most amount of time, especially in a city like Denver that has 3 million individual parcels. And that's how we did our analysis at the housing parcel level. And then we created our maps, which are an ongoing process. So these are the buildable lands reports that we found. The state of Oregon and the state of Washington have actually implemented laws saying that it must be done in cities and in certain regional areas. Fort Collins did a small one in 2008. Anchorage, Alaska has done one, but in general, there's not a lot of studies out there, at least not called buildable lands. There's some others that are looking at land sort of underutilization or mismatch. But what the goal is to look at a parcel as it's being used and look at how it could be used and determine whether those things are mismatched. And so we're taking that idea and we're modifying it a little bit. What we're saying is there's all these parcels in the city and we need places for housing. What are there parcels that are available currently not being used for potential micro community housing, but that could be? So we're modifying our goal a little bit, and in order to really make it useful for sort of what we want to do. So then we had to select really, what are we going to be looking at? So in buildable land studies, usually they're determining housing capacity or how many housing units need to be built in order to meet the growing population. Ours is looking where and how many places would we need to build in order to meet the needs of the unhoused population. And some studies also consider economic development needs, meaning they will add in an added layer of would people get jobs here? We're taking that out of our study. That's not a key component because what we're adding in instead is health and whether or not the location of where we say these places could go are safe and healthy. So these are the questions that arose. What are we currently using as site types and where are they in Denver? And through our research, we discovered that these are all the places where people are currently living who don't have a permanent house. We did a lot of research on figuring out proximity to industry. This, of course, is outlined in a lot of environmental justice. There is no right or wrong answer. Everybody argues, and very few people actually consider aggregated effects. What I mean is, perhaps there's an EPA regulation that says a quarter of a mile from a facility that pollutes SO2, sulfur dioxide, is safe. But what happens when that factory also is putting PM 2.5 and ozone into the air? And you add all three of those aggregated effects on top of one another. Plus, the site is built on top of a historic landfill and next to a highway. All of these effects, are coming into play, and that impacts people and the environment. And so we, in our analysis, we did 3 different buffers: a mile, a quarter mile, a half mile, and a mile, in order to understand sort of what if we change this analysis, what does it look like? What slope is too steep for development? You could build on a 40-degree slope, except it's going to cost a lot more money in terms of mitigation and in terms of bringing resources in. So when we were doing this, we eliminated any parcels that were steeper than 15 degrees. We also eliminated any parcels that are smaller than a half acre or larger than 10 acres because half-acre sites are too small for multi-unit housing. 10 acres are often too big and have lots of requirements about what has to go there. So we're not necessarily in this study saying these are all the areas where land use needs to change. It's highlighted on its own. You'll see when I show you the maps. Ideal proximity to services. So what we're saying is if you're an unhoused person, we did a lot of research on figuring out how far can they walk to get the services they need: health, food, anything they need to live a healthy life wherever they're living. Depending on the study, of course, it's between a quarter and a half mile. So again, we included that in our analysis. And how to determine unused buildings. Well, this is a challenge because buildings become unused every single day and they are rented every single day. So if we are able to continue with this work and we could get some, more funding and help, we can continue and make this a real live time, click on this and see what building is available. So, yes. Oh yeah, of course. So NACTO, you can see a resource right there. This is the National Organization of Transit Planners, Transit Professionals. And so they work for transit infrastructure, things like roadways, transit, sidewalks. Thank you. So this is how we decided to exclude sites. So essentially what we did is we started with a data set that was put together and generously given to us by Dr. Makarevitz at the Department of Urban Planning at CU Denver. She used some grant funding to create a generalized 8-county zoning map. So they gave that to us, and that's how we started our analysis. Essentially, what we did is we eliminated all the parcels that were zoned in ways we knew were going to create a problem in terms of timing. So anything that would have to go in front of a long potential hearing in order to get zoning changed, we eliminated them. So single family residential, not saying it's the right path, I'm saying we did it to demonstrate sort of easiest steps. Mixed use areas that are low density. And then we also, right off the bat, eliminated any parcels that included or were within a mile of EPA tracked industrial sites. We also eliminated historic places because of, rules around what's allowed to be in the same parcels as a historic place. The next analysis that we eliminated were things like floodplains, brownfield sites, and Superfund sites. Of course, these are two places that are, these are two types of land contamination that are monitored by the EPA. Some of them are under actual mitigation now, or some of them could potentially be used for mitigation in the future. What this means is in the past, they've had some sort of manufacturing or industrial use on them that has created long-term contamination that needs to be mitigated or studied more. You'd be surprised at how many of these there are around our area. And then anything that really is monitored by the EPA in terms of toxic releases and water pollution. So we eliminated those sites, and any site that was within 1 mile of a highway or railroad infrastructure. Then we wanted to make sure also that the parcels were within a mile of resources: schools, hospitals, shelters, parks, rec centers, libraries, anything that might potentially provide or be able to provide services for unhoused people. And finally, the geography, so the slope and the size. So what's missing? Well, this is not the end all be all. What you're going to find out is at the end of the story map I'm about to share, there's a place for you to share your feedback. We want to revisit this after we hear from you all. What should we do better? What should we exclude? Should we consider things in a new way? So what's missing? Analyzing the variables. We specifically pulled out individual EPA interest sites. However, we could apply the tool created by CDPHE, the EnviroScreen, because that's an index that's already created. So thinking about, the best ways to really understand site selection. Are our buffer distances, do they make sense? The walk sheds, meaning how far people can walk. Do we need to reanalyze that? And then, there's a lot of issues with data consistency. Anybody who works in data, there's no real rules about how data have to be collected. So zoning codes change city by city. Parcels are not captured in the same way. The data sets all include different information. And then not all of the parcels that are included in this, in our analysis are ready to be, have utility infrastructure set up. And so there may be a little bit more development that needs to happen. So if you have a laptop or a phone, you can visit the QR code or the code right there. And I'm going to show you now the story map that we have created. So what a story map is, yes, sorry. So what a story map is essentially an interactive way to demonstrate data. It will look a little bit different on your phones. You won't see the map, but if you click on it, it will pop up. So just keep that in mind. So in the story map, what you'll notice is, of course, there's a lot of background information, but then there's interactivity that's going to allow you to explore our research and our data. So what you will notice is at the top, there's a bunch of information about how we defined our terms and what inspired what we're doing. Some of this should look familiar to you. This is what we just went through. Then this is a static map just showing our study area. So these are the 7 largest counties in the Denver metro area, the 7 largest counties that are included in the DRCOG region. So you can see here, these are the 7 counties where we did our analysis on. And these are our data sets. with our sources. So these are all the spatial data sets that we gathered, that we combined, that we analyzed in order to make the decisions that we are about to show you. So regional zoning codes, parcels. The reason why we chose parcels specifically, as opposed to something like a block or a census tract, is because at the parcel level, we can analyze number of buildings. We really can get into, you know, the smallest level of geography that exists. And while it is really tedious, and oftentimes it would take, I don't know, 18 hours or so for me to run an analysis, I'd set it one day, I'd come back the next, it would just be finishing up. It's worth it, because what you can see is when we get to the exploration, you can click on each individual parcel. So here's our reasoning for why we chose these data and why we chose the variables that we chose. So you can see we explain here what I showed you on the slides before, but these are the data sets that we either included or that we analyzed in, you know, as we broke things down. So this is the part of the story map that gets interactive. So as you scroll, you will see for each level of analysis, the number of parcels available changes. So if this is the whole 7-county region, after our first analysis, where we are eliminating inappropriate land use, unsafe spaces, and places like historic places and landfills, this is what's left. So now with each step, you'll see, once we remove, or once we consider and keep only those places with services, once we, let's see, eliminate places that are far away from transit, once we eliminate places that have steep slopes, and once we eliminate places that aren't the right size. So this is our final analysis based on our data. So this is what we have remaining. By county and by region, we can see the total number of parcels that we start out with. So Adams County, for example, has total 177 parcels that equal about 757,000 acres. At each step, you can see the number that goes down. And at the end, you can see Adams County has about 1% of its land left to house the unhoused, based on our analysis. Right now, if we change the data, if we change our proximity, that could change. But based on what we have decided for this study, which we want your feedback on, that's what this analysis is saying. So with that output, now this is for you to explore. So you can zoom in and out. Let me show you how. You can zoom over on the left. This is every available parcel in the city based on the analysis that we did. And if you zoom in and you click on a parcel, it will tell you all about it. So you can learn what county it's in. You can learn how big it is. You can learn where the closest light rail stop is, where the closest bus stop is. You can learn how many services there are within the buffer, how many buildings are on the property right now. What we don't have connected yet, but what we would like to connect is for you to also then be able to get directly to the assessor's record. So then you can learn who owns this property. That is just going to take a little bit of coding and automation on my part. That's coming next. So please know that we do want to make this totally usable so that you could click and know who owned that, call them up, talk to them. That's the goal. So, two things that I noticed right off the bat, obviously, as I'm sure you did too, is that first set of analysis really took away the most parcels. And so if we look at land that is zoned as residential and land that is zoned as industrial, you know, number one, industrial sites aren't safe. So these are places that could potentially be mitigated and become safe in the future. Residential housing, of course, it varies by county, but there is a lot of land use that is zoned for single family that, you know, with the addition, for example, of an ADU or something like that, we could make it not that anymore and really increase the space for people to live. So one thing that I want to share This is another piece that is currently being developed, but this is a map of the original 11 proposed micro communities in the city. Now we know that some of them have changed, some of them have been scrapped, but based on those original 11 locations, we did some analysis where we looked at, here's the location of the proposed micro community site, here's a mile buffer, what's it like there? So what this is showing you is the zoning and land use, as well as some, not even all, but some of the hazards. So for the site at the top, which is, you can see that the purple is industrial zoning, the pink stripes are Superfund site, and the black polygons are historic landfills, and the blue is a floodplain. Plus there's a highway. Okay, I think this is a great spot to put a bunch of people who potentially, you know, have health issues. I only chose 2 to show you. I mean, really, the only 2 that were kind of healthy are the ones in Southeast Denver that were scrapped right off the bat. And so this other site, which is about at 6th Avenue-ish, right? 6th Avenue, yep. You can see same thing here. There's a lot more historic landfills, which means all of these places are built on top of contaminants that probably weren't dealt with because there weren't laws at the time that the neighborhoods were developed about what that meant. There's a little bit of Superfund site, there's a brownfield site there, but a lot of this is commercial and floodplain. We're putting communities in places that are going to flood. And we know that we're seeing floods in the city more frequently because of climate change. And so this is, we've looked at it one way where we propose better places, but now we want to look at it this other way where we can actually see where are we proposing to put people. This is better. This is where we're at. And so what we would like to really be able to do is think about just how to make better decisions, how to help people inform their decisions, how to demonstrate that, you know, I didn't find any data here that wasn't publicly available. There's no reason why these data can't be used to make better decisions, none at all. People who can do the work exist. We're here. We know how to do it. We have advocates. So let's make better choices. At the end of this story map, there's a survey. It's in English and Spanish. And I will get an email every time you fill it out. I will analyze the results, and Ian and me and the team will use this to make this tool better, to make it usable, to include new information, to, you know, I would also love for, I don't know, you're a city official for Commerce City, you want to download a table of all of the healthy places. That's my next step. That will come along with this sort of parcel identification. So making this a tool that you can print out your own Excel spreadsheet. You can download your own geospatial data and make your own map of your own community, or, you know, something like that. So I think I have a few more slides. So really that's it. That's the next steps. This is what we've come up with. It's not the end. This is where community participation comes in, right? We know what we know. We don't know what you know. We don't know what it's like to live where you live, or to know what it is that you know and what you're an expert in. So let's get together and make this better. We want to apply feedback from the survey. We want to consider if you all have ideas for different or better data sets, more updated data that might be more helpful, or you know, that we could turn on and off in order to consider different options. We want to, some of the parcels that ended up remaining were really oddly shaped. And so I need to come up with some creative way to eliminate those without doing it hand by hand. And then eventually attaching the assessor's records. And then from that, creating the web app that allows you to download whatever you want. Questions?
Yeah, we're prepared for questions. And as you can see, quite the expert to be working with. I'm so grateful for your work. We actually met because she was working on another project that was analyzing environmental concerns in layers all across the state of Colorado for Latino communities. Obviously, that intersects with my work with Green Latinos. So as you saw there, we began the journey on this tool long before the current mayor began his micro community project, right? But this is why creating tools that allow us to make accurate decisions based in data. So you didn't see it here, but we have the ability to have scores for some of these things, right? So you can imagine It's +1 if it has near a service. It's -1 if it has a negative outcome. Those facilities that you pointed to in District 8, where more than 500 people right now are being housed, is -30. And that's only because we made the decision that everything is -1. But the cool part about this tool is it can be adaptive if we're having people who are actually policy decision making using it. You could say being next to a transit stop is actually +6, or you could say being next to an ethylene oxide facility is -20, right? And it's by playing with those tools and those numbers, we can refine this data set and these tools to help us make the best decisions in our community. I am so incredibly impressed by this ability for it to be accessible for you, or hopefully people are tuning in online, please share it. We are hoping to, again, make a book. And the reason we're asking you what kind of user you are is because I was always a lover of choose your own adventure stories as a kid. Turn to page 12 if you want to choose your own adventure. And this is what we're hoping to do with this book. Whether you're a first-time person who knows nothing about housing but wants to get engaged, a policy advocate, a decision maker, or a person who's actually in a real estate office for a city or a county, we believe this is the right tool for you. And please stay tuned because there's more research coming along, not just for this project. And one thing I want to address right off the bat, which is some people may say, well, people already live in these communities. Why can't we put people there? They're already being exposed to those hazards. That comes back to the work Mandy was talking about, which is we've accessed through the Green New Deal, through the Build Back Better, the ability to change circumstance. So we can look at these maps and we can look at risk. And now Green Latinos, and through my job and with the University of Colorado Public Health School, we are actually taking a look at how do we look at these layers and help connect people to the funding to actually do something about it, to change the circumstances. And it may behoove us to say, it makes a lot more sense to close a toxic facility and build up around a light rail that we invested billions into a network on than it is to say that 300 jobs are more important than the livelihood of others. This is a balance that we always have to come to, right? As decision makers, as leaders, about deciding where economic input and health come together. We are showing you today that we can do both. So yeah, I think let's take questions from the audience, and we're happy to delve more into the tool as well with you.
I'll start. It's okay. I'm going to address just the two questions, or I'll do one at a time, but we have some online questions. I want to make
Oh,
sure we do
fantastic.
as well. I'll save my questions for last. I have my questions. Okay, the first question is, are you using AI to stream the analysis? They did not specify
No.
how. Okay,
No.
Yeah. Real life researchers here. We do not need AI for that.
Yeah, there's too many times where I've tried to rely on AI and what it tells me is just a complete fabrication. I'm not ready to trust it yet, maybe eventually, but not in terms of making analysis related to people's livelihoods. I'm not yet.
Have to double check the work. Okay, I'm going to pass the mic. So if we have in-person hands too, I'll bring you the mic.
Hi there, thanks so much for this. This is really fascinating and important work. I guess I'm wondering if you could say maybe a little bit about how you plan to work with, collaborate with unhoused and like precariously housed communities in terms of this tool, in terms of they think of the methodology, especially in the context of, needing a phone, internet, right, a laptop to access like this device. So just wondering if you had thoughts on that.
I think that's a really good question about crossing that digital divide. I think that there's a lot going on with libraries. How do we train librarians to use this tool is up to us. How do we get housing advocates like House Key Action Network Denver or 9 to 5 Colorado or Colorado Homes for All to truly embrace using this tool? That's on us. We are on an education journey of educating county commissioners and offices. The great part is we now have this translated. We have it recorded. So we can watch this, we can take pieces out of this. And we already were talking about how do we get in front of the Denver Regional Council of Governments? How do we get involved with the local community to present this to them? I think that the best way, of course, I think to reach with unhoused advocates themselves is to partner with them. And how do we find a way where we can bring people in, offer them services and educate them? At the end of the day, we want to see the tool be used, and if that's used by the people who are seeking advocacy because they're living on the streets right now or they're a decision maker, I think we're all ears to feedback that you might have in the survey.
Yeah, and that's a good point because, we've already collected the data about where services are located. It would be very easy to tailor it to people who are using it on a phone or using it in a library, with somebody who can help them. That, of course, is the digital divide issue. But that it could also become a resource tool rather than helping people determine where to build homes, help people who are unhoused find the resources because now it's all compiled. We've got it all in one place. I'm glad you brought that up because it's not something I thought about specifically. Did we address your question? Yes, good.
Hi there. Thank you so much for the talk. I do a lot of research in public health, so this is a topic that's near and dear to me. And so I guess the primary question I had was, in regard to the tool itself, have you thought about a more dynamic approach to how you measure access to services?
Mhm.
So for example, the nearest service may be, a residential service within half a mile, but a school, hospital, et cetera, would
Mhm.
be 15 miles away. I don't
Mhm.
see that those two situations are created equally
You're right.
necessarily. So I was just wondering if what your approach was to that, if you've thought about it, or what challenges you've encountered.
Yeah, and kind of like Ian said, at this point, because we're just introducing this and what feedback, everything is one, negative one or positive one. I don't feel like I on my own can make all these decisions about the weightedness of a library that provides internet as more important or as opposed to a Superfund site, right? How do they really cross each other out? I don't know. That's where this is sort of a baseline for let's think about this and let's figure out not everything is valued the same. Absolutely right.
I would also just add that, the picket fence book that I was talking about there, that study, I think it's about the partnerships of saying, how can we work with the people who are experts serving people doing point in time studies? Can they ask questions about what services are more important? We certainly do know that there are some things people prefer more than others, like being able to leave in 24 hours a day and come and go, whether they have rules, can they have a pet, right? We see how those things are ranked now through surveying, and I think that can be developed more.
This is wonderful. My name is Thomas DePero, and one of the things which I'm wondering is if we flip the script and we say, what are the issues that are impacting the availability of land? What does that give us as far as future opportunities for making policy and choices about how do we approve land uses, or what happens to the land when the use is expiring, when that purpose is no longer appropriate? What can we use? How can we use this tool to create more land that is suitable and is actually healthy for our people?
No, I appreciate that. And instead of being able, or in addition to clicking on a parcel that is available, clicking on one and learning why it's not. These are and again, the data's all there. I would just have to create that layer and the clickability to understand there's this many acres are, of this, and there's this many negative polluters, and absolutely. And then from there, thinking about then what would be the easiest to mitigate, what's going to, like you said, the land use is going to need to change sooner rather than later. Definitely part of the index that we created that isn't finished yet, so we haven't shown you, that Ian was talking about, definitely. But we need help with the weighting and figuring out what is more important, what can be mitigated faster. Not everything needs the same amount of time. So I think that thought is exactly what we need to develop next.
Yeah, I will say that we chose this time to also release it because it's in this context of coming off of a large effort in the city of Denver to bring people off the streets, but how do we turn that into long-term housing, not just shelter? And then moreover, we're in the middle of these state battles, right, around land use zoning. I think one of the things is about single family zoning, you'll see how big of a piece of the chunk that takes off the top. Now that's a big conversation, but the time it takes to respond to a crisis, to do one parcel at a time, is both expensive and too time consuming to truly be a solution. But I will say, despite the number looking rather small, there are still lots of acres that we
Oh,
can build
yeah.
on right now. And
Would we
so
say
what I hope that people
5,000?
can take away from this is that like we have more than enough right now to solve for the problem we have right now. And then as we're talking about developing going forward in Denver, how do we make sure a tool like this is at the decision-making table when a city council is voting on a real estate decision?
Sir, I see your hand. I'm gonna go to
Yeah,
one.
137,000 acres. I mean, imagine that and put to use in multifamily.
I'm gonna answer one or address one question from the Zoom attendees real quick. Would it be possible to integrate food access? Perhaps eliminate parcels and food deserts, or an alternative would be, can the maps be used for planners to inform where food resources are needed?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, there's another project we're actually working on in the lab that's specifically focused on food and food accessibility and what kinds of food are available. You know, a lot of people who are living on the street in unhoused situations, they don't have access to a microwave. So that can of beans that you donated, it's not going to help them at all. They need food that's ready to eat and that's prepared now. And so, yes, absolutely, we would love to add in accessibility to food and considering whether it's food for people who don't have a place to cook it versus are in poverty but have a house. That's very different in the services that are needed.
So hi, I've worked professionally as an urban planner and also as a researcher. I'm retired right now, but worked 25 years ago when buildable lands analysis was first introduced in Washington State. I just want to make a quick comment. This is brilliant. So where I've seen buildable lands analyses done before has basically been in the arena of identifying opportunities for infill and redevelopment to curb outward growth, exurban sprawl, leapfrog development, and so on. And they have worked in those systems. But bringing in this whole health lens just adds a richness and a detail that I think just puts this ahead of the pack in terms of being a dynamic and useful tool for analyzing where there are opportunities. And again, spot on that we're doing this in terms of how we can address places where people are currently unhoused, may be able to have homes, such a priority. But this work is going to be rich in terms of having conversations that are now sometimes very anecdotal. I'll just mention quickly in Denver, regardless of what side you were on with the Park Hill Golf Course issue, I mean, one of the narrative points there was this is the last available land for development in the city, which having an analysis like this could have helped that conversation be more honest and fact-based. And also with issues in terms of where we have opportunities to grow park and open space lands within our communities. So multiple benefits I see with this going forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
Glad you're proud of it.
Yeah,
Rocky.
yeah, definitely, definitely.
So thanks for keeping this slide up. I noticed this in the presentation before. I get the density, the greater walkability, access to services, access to bus routes is probably one of the reasons that this data point is so high. But why is Denver at 68% of its available land? And I wonder if then things like is City Park accidentally added in there that might be providing an outlier figure like that.
When you showed later, 20% is residential, so that's still pretty high compared to the other cities. Still doesn't answer your question.
So out of proportion.
Yeah.
No, yeah, you're right.
Walkability for access to transportation.
Yeah. No, you're right. I think that that's something I need to address. It's possible that there was an issue in the table, but thank you for pointing it out because that does seem to be an outlier that I didn't notice in preparation.
Is that one
I have
different
some
there?
questions if there are not others from it. Okay. I'll not ask all of them right now, but so My first question is a little bit conspiratorial in thinking, but this is great that it's shared with whoever. And I like your vision of use it for the purpose you have in mind. There's lots of different ways people can collaborate to use this. But my first thought was, what if this gets in the hands of real estate investors who just want all of the last good plots? Like, do you have a vision for that are not going to build affordable housing or housing for families? Do you have a vision for policies that could, is that even allowed? Can we be like, you're not allowed to buy this?
Well, I mean, coming from politics, anything's possible. Just whether if you have the money and the legal will and the political will, certainly we're in a political will here. I will tell you that my belief is that there's still plenty of acres here. And the goal really should be, we should start land banking it. Whether or not we have the resources to develop it now, we should be. And I think that as you see in my research, that entire textbook about public financing tools, we have a lot of financing tools to get creative about land banking this land now to meet our goals. To me, this couldn't hit at a better time because one of the pieces of legislation that's moving through the state capitol is an actual analysis of how many 3-bedroom apartments we need, how many single units do we need, right? Based on the population that's living here now. And so I think it's about matching those two and then focusing the Proposition 123 resources. It's getting that in the minds of the people who are the decision makers to buy those parcels. Is it possible that these pieces of land are going to be more expensive? They probably already are. I mean, we haven't been able to connect this to the surveying, but they're in the healthier parts of the city. Often we know that those are the parcels that are more expensive. They have more access to the amenities we've been talking about. They have unobstructed view planes to the mountains, just as an example, But I think that, we are in a position, especially in Denver, where we do have the resources to begin doing that now. And I think, the vision here is if we needed to, we could begin camping people there, turning them into micro communities, holding it for a few years, and then eventually making that into a multifamily. And putting they call it a capital stack, right? Of the LIHTC credits, the resources from Proposition 123, the bond money, our general dollars that we have just from our tax base. And so you start to put that together in order to make the projects work. And I will say there is overall a movement too around social housing of actually the government being the one to develop and own them instead of working through a housing authority.
Okay, thank you, Ian. I'm going to ask another question that actually came in through email. And I'm going to say her name is Shannon Young. And this is for both of you. Shannon works in one of the larger migrant shelters in Denver, scrambling to try to connect people reaching their end of stay with housing options. And often she's the person interfacing directly with people trying to line up places to stay. And you had mentioned a summit to cross-train cultural workers to work on emergencies. If you can just kind of address that again, if you have any kind of firm timelines for that sort of training or ways that people like Shannon can connect with you and the larger work that you're doing.
So Shannon, if you're still tuned online, I would say look up the Art of Mass Gatherings. That is the partner group. And I realized that I didn't mention a couple of the other people who helped develop that scaling safe outdoor sites. We had Mo Natick, who actually managed the largest camping festival in Colorado. We had Jordan Nickerson, who comes from permitting like hundreds of events a year. So you can talk about the understanding of right-of-way fencing, all those kinds of things. And Jamie Helt, who ran the largest indoor festival in the country, which is called Decadence. It takes place here in December. And so we have a big group of people who are working on those ideas. So the Art of Mass Gatherings is currently involved in other states where they have these whole curriculums and their governments have bought into it. I know that Mateo has applied for grants here. I've made this presentation to the mayor several times. I will say, if you'd like to see this happen, I'm happy to collaborate with you. Also, a nudge in the mayor's office about bringing together the arts, parks, and emergency management, I think is a really smart idea.
Hi, Ian. Thank you
Hi.
for inviting me. Xochitl Gaitan. I'm really concerned about the idea of city owning the land and helping with this effort because of the last decade or two, city council people voting in funding mechanisms like metro districts to build on this land. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit with the audience what that is and how that could affect, that funding mechanism could affect future owners or residents of that land.
Sure. Thanks, Sochi. Metropolitan districts is a type of taxing entity that's quasi-governmental. It's often used for a large subdivision when a subdivision is constructed. So, think out in Central Park or even in some of the older neighborhoods in Denver where there's large developments taking place. The purpose of a metro district is to defray costs for the infrastructure that you need to build under the ground. So you're talking about, or the roads themselves, where you're talking about the power, you're talking about wastewater, you're talking about electricity. And so normally, I guess developers have a choice, right? They can go out and take on all of that risk and put the money in and get the money out when they sell it. Or they can create these metro districts who have taxing authority and they go out and get bonds to build the infrastructure underground. And then that cost is deferred over lifetime as you're paying back the loans. Where there's been some corruption, I suppose, around metropolitan districts is about who controls them. And sometimes in these complex development schemes, you may have one parcel that rules them all. There's one board that really makes all the decisions and to tells the other smaller metro districts what to do. And the people who actually have the representation on that board are the developers themselves, who are in their own interest rather take on debt and defray that off to the people years later. And so what happens is people buy these parcels, they're getting their regular taxes, and bam, they get hit with this metro tax for their infrastructure underground that they weren't expecting. And sometimes they get in the rears and then they get their houses taken. And that's why there's been a lot of homeowner association kind of reform that's been discussed at the Capitol for many years. And actually one of our neighbors, right, Jim Gibson in Southwest Denver has been fighting on this for years. I think in this instance, if you were to say take a parcel and land bank it and it were going to be turned into a modular home development or a multifamily, I think that underground infrastructure is already kind of going to be in it. And I think included in the cost in the upfront development for the project itself. As you can see, we do have measurements to tell you if utilities exist there or not. I think that's an important part to think about. And you also will see that we exited out parcels that are larger than 10 acres. And so often those larger parcels that you're talking about fall into that infrastructure realm. I will say that this tool could be paired with a longer term infrastructure plan for the city, right? We're facing this now, and this relates to my work with Green Latinos, of gentrification, and now how much power do we need? And where do we put those new power stations? Are they across from our parks like we're seeing in Swansea? And is that fair for the families that are already overburdened? Or could have been on the National Western? But that's just one form of utility. And so I think, we talked about this, I think when we were running for mayor, this topic of long-term infrastructure planning came up, and just simply, we're not there, but we need to be. I think this question here in the front.
Hi, Moshe Kornfeld. I love this. And in particular, this tool shows there's no excuse to build housing on dangerous lands that are not close to services. I guess my question is, I'm kind of getting a little overwhelmed by how much space there is. If you are a policymaker, decision maker, how do you go from this to your 10, to the 10 best spots or the 10 viable spots? What are the next steps to, getting to making actual decisions that might work from this overwhelming number of parcels where you could put, tracks, developments that are healthy and appropriate. So how do you go from here and in a way that, for me, at least for me, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed.
No, I appreciate that, because what in my mind, it's well, there's a series of questions you need to ask yourself. Do you have the possibility to build a new structure, or do you need a parcel that has a structure on it? When might that structure become available if it's already being occupied? Do there need to be changes to that structure in order to make it useful for what it is that you need? If the parcel hasn't been developed yet, let's think of you're a county commissioner, you work for a city government, you need blank number of units in order to get you up to your sort of housing threshold. Well, if we look at the number of people that are allowed to or live in, every square block, how many square blocks do you need? If you meet density at a place, if you set a goal for density, then you could start to look at the map of parcels that are adjacent to one another that would allow that. Maybe you just need one with a building that's built. So that's really where the next piece of analysis will come in, that will allow you to make some queries and really narrow it down even further. Or maybe we build that in ourselves and allow you to click things, turn them on and off. These are the parcels that have this. These are the parcels that have this. So these are fantastic questions that will help us make this even better.
I will just add that it certainly does feel overwhelming when you look at all 7 counties, but when you are just a housing authority, you could look at what your covered territory is. And I think that those numbers start to become a lot more manageable. I think it is overwhelming to be a strategist and say, we need to go here, we need to go here. And in fact, in some regional communities in particular, where these buildable analyses are required in Washington and Oregon, they have much stronger regional governments, right? Where they actually have teeth about their growth limits and decisions about zoning. Here in Colorado, it's really about how can you get along and convince others. And so, in my perspective, I've taken, for example, the scaling safe outdoor sites, and we went to DRCOG and we just took over public comment, and we went 5 of us in a row. We got our 15 minutes in, we got leads. I think Councilwoman Allison Coombs might be on if the Aurora, but when we were talking about what it would be like to have rules for safe outdoor sites, we were doing this in the pandemic, where we're trying to come together as progressive leaders to say, how can we come up with some consistency across regions, trying to solve the same problem. And so I think the example that we showed you, where analyzing the decisions from Mayor Hancock or Mayor Johnson, is a great example of where it goes from being overwhelming to we identified these sites. Now let's apply these numbers to them and see where it comes out. And again, this is all +1, -1. So you could again say, all right, well, we're going to make the decision that, because this is an emergency, being next to a roadway of 40,000 cars isn't as bad as 80,000 cars. And so we're going to give that one, a -1 versus a -3, and that can help you dial it in. Any other questions? All right. Awesome. Well, thank you.